Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. My favourite interview this week was between Katrina Ffrench, the founder of Unjust, the charity that focuses on police discrimination, and Graham Wettone, an ex-police officer and author. It was about whether police should be using what's called a Section 60, which is where police designate an area following a violent incident and say that in that area they can stop and search anybody. That's different from the usual powers of stop and search that require the police officer to have reasonable grounds to suspect that particular individual of committing a crime. And you'll hear that referred to as PACE, P-A-C-E, because it's based on the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And so we start off with Kay Burley, the problematic journalist, asking whether or not the powers to stop and search without reasonable grounds should be used.
Is it fit for purpose?
Depends what the purpose is. In terms of effectiveness for knife crime prevention, it is not.
I think it is. I think it's a very effective tactic for policing. If serious violence has taken place or is likely to take place, they can put a Section 60 in for a limited geographical area for a certain period of time, and then they can stop and search people without having to, first of all, get those reasonable grounds that you do with a normal stop and search.
So that's like a football game or Notting Hill Carnival or something.
Absolutely,
like that.
or some sort of protest.
So they're already setting up the idea that this is only used in special circumstances like football games, Notting Hill Carnival and protests. We'll come back to that.
I don't think you kind of answered the question though in terms of efficacy. The report that Stopwatch released showed that since 2001, and we're now nearly 25 years later, there's been a 0.6 arrest rate for serious violence. So if it was so impactful, then we would anticipate seeing higher figures. So I think we have to be really careful in terms of describing the process of what it takes to put in a Section 60 is very different to the impact and the outcome that the power has.
It's not a detection tactic. It's not there to arrest people. Arrest figures shouldn't be used to judge stop and search. We put a Section 60 in either because the serious incident is likely to take place or may take place, or it's already happened. And we actually tell people where it's going to be, how long it's going to go for. So you're actually telling people, if you come to this area with a knife or a dangerous instrument, you're going to be stopped and searched. So people clearly aren't going to go there if they've got them. That's why arrest figures shouldn't be used as the judgment for if Section 60 is effective or not. It's actually a deterrent tactic.
Okay, so it doesn't matter that only 0.6% of the people that you stop and search without reasonable grounds have actually committed a crime. So no matter how innocent the population is, you're going to keep detaining and searching them. Okay. And this is where Katrina starts to poke holes in his logic.
So what is a metric that one should be using then to ascertain whether it's impactful or effective?
I don't think arrest is the right metric to use.
So I'm asking what is, you've stated that it isn't, but...
Well, I think we've seen them dropping, so it's to stop violence escalating. So what we're trying to do is stop the violence from escalating, so serious incidents from taking place even more. So a 60 goes in place to actually stop the disorder and the violence from taking place.
No, I understand exactly what a Section 60 is designed to do. My concern with it is it doesn't do what it's designed to do, is actually reduce serious youth violence, reduce violence. Rather than do that, it actually starts to impact communities that are being stereotyped, racialised for being in a particular area because something's happened, and it damages trust and confidence. We've seen over the last 30 years that it hasn't had the impact that you would hope for. There are other powers, and I would actually say that when a police officer uses PACE, which is the standard grounds, they're more likely to find a weapon when they use reasonable grounds. The statistics show that when officers observe somebody doing something that they feel that is illegal or untoward and they use their powers, they're more likely to have a better detection rate. So I really would urge you to consider that arrest rates do speak to not just impact on the community, but also police time and police resource.
But they don't for stop and search either. For basic Section 1, the arrest rates aren't that high either. I think it's like something like 10 or 20%.
But that's much higher than 0.6.
But it is.
That's much higher than 0.6.
It's just so beautiful because that man was given the arrest rate for searches that don't have reasonable grounds for suspicion as being 0.6%, and yet he tried to argue that the arrest rate for searches that do have reasonable grounds for suspicion wasn't that much higher, even though he knew it was about 20%, i.e. 40 times more effective, allowing Katrina to shove his own words back down his throat. Beautiful. But as usual, when their arguments are completely defeated, they jump to another.
We've seen them reduce at football matches, use around football, because they've been effective. So they're almost a victim of their own success to some extent. But
okay, so there he's arguing that stopping and searching people without having suspicion of that individual at football stadiums has been so successful that they don't need to do it anymore. Again, framing it as if it's just about football games, and we'll come back to that later. Second of all, if that was true, doesn't that suggest that the fact that you're still using this 25 years later in poor neighborhoods means it's not an effective tool. Do you get me? Because if you're judging how effective the tool is based on how much it eliminates the need for itself, then you're effectively making the argument that stopping and searching people without reasonable grounds in their own residential communities doesn't exactly increase their respect for the law. Because by your own logic, you wouldn't be doing it anymore, because you wouldn't have to.
We're saying that Section 60 should be disbanded, it shouldn't be used, and that at the moment, PACE is on the record books and has been there for the last 30 years, has a better detection. Then they need to undergo, they need to go into better training and develop. They need to go, so they should then be able to use their powers carte blanche.
Okay, if I'm getting this correctly, he's saying that because when police use the normal stop and search powers, where they have reasonable grounds, which, by the way, can include stories like Hugo Boateng, who was stopped simply because he was black and on a bike. When they use those powers, they're criticized for racial discrimination, and so that's why he believes they should be able to stop people without having reasonable grounds for suspicion. And let's be clear, the recent data says that black people are 5 times more likely to be stopped by police than white people. And when you break down the data and compare searches that are done with reasonable grounds for suspicion versus searches that are done without reasonable grounds, i.e. where the officer just goes, oh, I'm going to search that guy, the percentage of black people who get searched goes up. Funny that. And then they debate whether it's really carte blanche or blank check.
Exactly that, because it's carte blanche and punitive. What they should be doing is being trained. It is, because an officer in that moment doesn't have to have grounds to stop a particular person.
No, but you've still got to have the reasonable grounds to put it in place in the first place.
Yes, just because you've got reasonable grounds in the first place doesn't mean that every person within that vicinity should be subjected to an individual's perception.
Every person isn't. Every person isn't.
It is every person.
The level of bad faith in that argument he just made, as if she was arguing that every single person in a town that has a Section 60 order would be detained. No, she was saying that every single person in a town with a Section 60 order loses the right to know that they can walk around freely and go about their lives without being detained. And he knows that, but his argument for defending that is literally, but it won't happen to people like me.
If a Section 60 comes in at Carnival or at a football match, I'm not going to go and stop Mrs. Whoever standing at the bus stop.
No, you're not. We know who you're going to stop. We've seen it.
If you or I are out somewhere and there's been an incident of serious violence and a Section 60 comes in, then we are unlikely to be stopped and searched by the police.
Who's we?
You or I. You or I.
Why?
By the police.
Why?
Because if it involves normally young males, I'm not a young male anymore.
And he tries to run away from the clear implications there.
Yes, some are either the football fans that are going.
We are keep talking about football when we both
came in from football.
Yeah, but that's not where it's used mainly now. It's more.
It is used more around disorder and violence. So if you get disorder and violence,
so let's not use the preconception or the misconception that it's still being used in football grounds in the way that it was intended to 30 years ago.
Because football in this circumstance is code for white. He could see that she was leaning in a racial discrimination direction, and so he tried to use football as cover, even though he's already made the point that they don't use it in football matches anymore because it's been so successful. And the government data shows that there is a high concentration of stop and search in a small number of London boroughs, also referred to as deprived urban areas. And as you've heard me point out before, government research also shows the strong correlation between poverty, a lack of ability to escape poverty, and turning to crime. And black households are statistically the most likely to be in poverty in the UK. And government data also shows that having a black name means you face hiring discrimination, which makes it 80% harder to get a job to escape poverty. So unless you're arguing that there is some genetic link between black people and poverty, then any disparity in the crime stats is going to be linked to the poverty in those areas. The areas that Rishi Sunak bragged about taking money away from. Rishi Sunak, who the police officer in this debate happens to have praised. And yet he still comes out with phrases like this.
Disproportionately, we know that stop and searches on black communities. So it's interesting.
But again, isn't there an escalating violence within black communities? There are figures around that there are, I think, something like 70% more likely to be victims and something like 60 or 70% more likely to be suspects. So then
let's have a police power that has better detection rates and doesn't leave people feeling like they're being victimised by police.
So having supported the system that keeps black people in those high crime areas, he's still supporting using policing powers that will target what is essentially 99.4% innocent black people. Either he's bad at maths or he's racist. Ooh. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.